Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Inshallah, we will continue our lecture on Islamic economics. We will continue from last time. Last time we were talking about classification of needs in Islam. Based on the framework of Maqasid Sharia, needs are divided into three categories: daruriyat or necessities, hajiyat, and tahsiniyat. Okay, so we will start with the first need, which is daruriyat or necessities. So the higher needs in Maqasid Sharia is the first one, which is called daruriyat or necessities. Necessities here refer to those needs that cannot be postponed or left unfulfilled. These are the needs that human need in order to survive. It includes all activities and goods that are essential to the preservation of the foundations of good individual and collective life. These are the needs that are necessary in order for human beings to survive, to continue living. Avoiding the necessities or postponing them may destroy or damage some essential aspects of life. Among the needs are food, accommodation, clothing, um, food, accommodations, uh, clothing, and others that human needs in order to continue living. There are five daruriyat or necessities according to Imam Ash-Shatibi. The first one is the preservation of religion. The preservation of religion is the first daruriyat or necessities. As a Muslim, religion is the most important thing in our life. So religion is the sum of beliefs, rituals, and rules commanded by Allah to regulate people's relationship to Allah and relationship with each other. Allah has intended through those provisions as mentioned in the Quran to establishing religion and install religion in the people's souls as they follow it. So the preservation of religion is legitimated in many Sharia texts, in many books of fiqh that call to faith, and there is a need for faith or iman and encourage the faith and forbid infidelity. So for Muslims, religion is the first necessity in life. The second, the second daruriyat is preservation of soul. Islam has devoted a significant number of texts and teaching into establishing the preservation of souls. Hifzun nafs as the most fundamental principle of all, principle of life or principle of self, hifzun nafs. It is through life that mankind is able to maintain or preserve all of God's provisions and principles. Therefore, Islam protects the soul from being killed or wasted, but also established a set of rules to ensure its welfare spiritually and humanly. That is, to secure surviving needs such as food, marriage, shelter, drinks, and clothing. So we need food, we need marriage, shelter, drinks, and clothing in order to preserve the life. And we need rules that deny and forbid the all means of self-destruction. So Islam uh, prohibits the destruction of human lives, such as killing or taking anything that is harmful to our body, such as taking alcohol, drugs, or other things that are harmful to our body. The third necessity is preservation of mind. Hifzul aql. Hifzul aql. Allah has commanded us to preserve our minds, our aql. And Allah has forbid all the means to disable the minds through toxicities such as drugs and alcohol. The consumption of things which are harmful to our bodies, such as toxicities and alcohols, are prohibited in Islam. Allah has granted and distinguished humans from all other creatures by the grace of mind. So what's the difference between mankind and other creatures? The main difference is Allah has given the mankind the mind to think, the mind to make decisions, the mind, akal, to make choice and to solve the difficulties faced in life. So Allah has made humans therefore as his successor or Khalifa. Khalifa or vicegerent in English. So humans are entrusted as Khalifa or vicegerent on earth. So human beings need to maintain their mind, which is the basis of the discourse of succession on earth. So the mind is very important. The mind is the most important um, characteristic of human beings, which make the human beings differ from other creatures. Numerous amounts of Islamic teachings exhort or supports or encourage on the realization of the mind, its importance, and this and describes the mind as the altitude grace. As the ultimate grace. Means the most important characteristics of human beings. The third necessity is the preservation of lineage or offspring. Hifzun nasli or hifzun nasbi. For the sake of persevering humans' offspring, Sharia has legitimized marriage and reproduction. And for the sake of protecting the lineage or the nasab, Sharia has forbade adultery or zina and assigned a legal punishment or had for whoever commits it. Moreover, Sharia also assigned a legal punishment for whoever lies about or renders someone guilty unjustly of committing it. Haddul qazaf. So if someone accuse someone else of doing adultery without any proof, without being able to come up with 4 witnesses, then there is a legal punishment for those who lies, and it's called Haddul Qazaf. This proves that in maintaining the lineage or the nas, keturunan, a necessity for the purity of offspring from any potential distortion or corruption by mixing it. So one does not even know who are their parents or who are their children. So in Islam, it's very important to preserve the nasl or offspring by marriage and by uh, legal reproduction. That's why Islam make it haram for someone who commits zina and adultery in order to preserve the lineage. And the last one, but not least, is the preservation of wealth or hifzul mal. Sharia has commanded for the purpose of preserving humans' wealth, the pursuit of earning a living and permitted transactions and exchanges and trade. So Allah mentions in the Quran, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. And Allah permits sales and prohibits riba. So sales and transactions, business transactions are permitted. And of course, there are conditions for the permissibility of the akad or the contract of business transactions. So Sharia prohibits and placed punishments upon theft, deception, treason, riba, and consuming people's wealth unjustly. In addition to discouraging the squandering of money. Money, as well as everything else, belongs to Allah. Who has granted humans the status of Khalifa on earth. So, humans are commanded to preserve such grace and not to waste it. So, when human beings are bestowed with wealth, so they have to utilize the wealth that are bestowed upon them by Allah and use the wealth in accordance with Sharia. So the Islamic Sharia has established and reserved these 5 higher necessities, Daruriyatul Hams, and embodied them in all of its rulings, teachings, and good manners. Besides that, Sharia has built a system of rulings to construct these objectives so that all that lead to them, preservation of religion, preservation of lineage, preservation of mind, preservation of life, and preservation of wealth. So remember these five necessities: preservation of religion, hifzuddin, preservation of self or preservation of life, hifzun nafs, preservation of lineage, hifzun nasli, preservation of mind, hifzul aql, and preservation of wealth or hifzul mal. So the Islamic Sharia established these five higher necessities. So all rituals are legislated for the preservation of religion. All norms such as food, clothes, shelter, and drink are legislated for the preservation of self. All transactions are legislated for the preservation of wealth and lineage, and all punishments are legislated to prevent all harms and ward off that may occur on the way of achieving or fulfilling these five higher objectives. Okay, we are done with the first category of maqasid syariah, which is daruriyat or necessities. The second category of maqasid syariah is hajiyat or complementary or conveniences. This is the comfort category that refers to needs that are meant to improve and make life comfortable. So if an individual has fulfilled all the necessities, then if he or she is capable, then he or she can fulfill the hajiyat. This is the comfort category. The comfort category or hajiyat refers to needs that are meant to improve and make life comfortable. And if an individual fulfill the hajiyat, then the individual can fulfill tahsiniyat. Tahsiniyat means refinement, embellishment, or luxuries. Tahsiniyat refers to the need that beautify any aspect of life. Humans like to conduct their behavior in a specific manner or style to make them feel good and to make them feel appreciated in the community. So, an individual who are able to fulfill the daruriyat, necessities, hajiyat, complementary, they can also fulfill the tahsiniyat. But the fulfillment of tahsiniyat should be in moderation. Should be in moderation. Not to be excessive, because Islam encourages the consumption in moderation. Can you see the sharing or not? Boleh nampak tak?
Hmm.
Boleh?
Boleh.
Boleh
Boleh,
nampak?
Doktor.
Boleh, eh? So I'm moving the slide now. Can you see or not?
Boleh? Boleh nampak?
Okay, good. In Islam, need rather than want is the dominant factor in the first stage of consumer's choice. So in Islam, what's more important is to fulfill the need first, memenuhi keperluan. Then, if the need is fulfilled, then the fulfillment of want is also permissible, but in moderation. So in Islam, moderation or achieving balance is also important in pursuing human needs. So balancing means the consumption of goods and services and the fulfillment of needs in moderation. Sederhana. Okay? So balancing behavior, which is the consumption of goods and services in moderation, is the opposite of the concept of maximization or optimization, which is used in the conventional economic analysis. Within the Islamic microeconomic framework, maintaining balance is a normative analysis. Means that Muslims as economic agents have to consume goods and services which are halal in moderation, menggunakan barang-barang secara sederhana dan barang-barang itu perlulah barang yang halal. Alright. Any question before we move to chapter 4? Chapter 4 is about consumption in Islam. Okay, I will share these lecture notes with you after class. I hope you can be patient because I'm in the process of writing a textbook on Islamic economics. So this is the part of the materials in my textbook. So this textbook is written by me and is still in the process. Okay, so I will share with you as I keep on writing. Any question? Ada soalan tak? Fatin, Fatihah,
No,
Siti,
sir. No, Doktor.
Siti, Siti Rahmah, muka terbalik.
Tak ada, Doktor.
Awak muka terbalik. Okay, we continue with chapter 4, consumption in Islam. Okay, Muhammad Iqmal, you raise your hand. What's your question?
Tak ada. Tertekan.
Okay. Chapter 4, Consumption in Islam. This chapter describes the philosophy and objective of consumption in Islamic economics. In addition, this chapter elaborates on the principles that guide the behavior of consumers based on the Quran and the Sunnah. Philosophy and objectives of consumption. In Islam, the objective of an individual is to achieve falah. Falah means success or well-being. Success or well-being in this world and the hereafter. An individual's behavior is assumed to be rational in a sense that the individual Muslims act wisely and chooses an individual Muslim's behavior is assumed to be rational. In a sense that the individual acts wisely and the individual chooses the best means and the best alternatives to achieve the pleasure of Allah, to achieve mardatillah, keredaan Allah, the pleasure of Allah, by consuming goods and services which are in line with the Quran and the Sunnah, consuming the goods that are halal and tayyibah, halalan tayyibah. An individual Muslim is an abd or servant of Allah. Allah mentions in the Quran, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وما خلقت الجن والإنس وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون. Dan tidak aku, yakni Allah, ciptakan jin dan manusia, melainkan supaya mereka menyembah atau mengabdikan diri kepada Allah. So the purpose of the creation of jinns and human beings is as a servant of Allah, hamba Allah. And also an individual is Khalifa or vicegerent on the earth. So as a servant or abd, so as an abd, hamba, or servant of Allah, the individual has to follow the will of Allah as a Khalifa or vicegerent. The individual is given the amana or trust to utilize the resources created by Allah. Allah is the creator and Allah is the owner of all resources. And the individual is the trustee or the Khalifa, who is the trustee of the resources. Manusia adalah sebagai diberikan amanah untuk menguruskan sumber-sumber. So the individual is the trustee of the resources and should behave according to the will of Allah. Means to follow the command of Allah and not to do what is prohibited by Allah. Although absolute ownership belongs to Allah, Islam recognizes ownership rights of the individual and society. Okay, wait. All right, we continue. So as an abd or servant of Allah, the individual has to follow the will of Allah as a Khalifa or vicegerent. The individual is given the amana or trust to utilize, means to make use of the resources created by Allah. Allah is the creator and Allah is the owner of all resources. And the individual is the trustee of the resources and should behave according to the will of Allah. All the resources created by Allah must be used in the best possible way, according to Sharia. Although absolute ownership belongs to Allah, Islam recognizes ownership rights of the individual and society. So if the individuals make an effort, they do business, they work hard, and they possess property, Islam recognizes the private property. And Islam also uh, permits the ownership of the property. So private property and wealth are bestowed upon individuals who make effort. They work hard, they do business, they make the necessary efforts so they can possess the resources, the wealth, and the property. However, the resources bestowed upon individuals who work hard to earn the resources is considered as a trust or amana, which involves obligations towards oneself and others. So if an individual possess wealth, they possess money, the wealth, the property, the money has to be used according to Sharia for oneself, for himself or for herself. And also the wealth should be spent on others, like giving zakat. For those individuals, Muslims who are eligible to pay zakat, for example, part of the zakat, part of the wealth must be paid to the zakat authority, and the zakat authority has the obligation to distribute the zakat to the asnaf. So consumption is regarded as an ibadah or act of worship to Allah. When Muslims spend their money to purchase goods and services, it is also called ibadah because the consumption, the spending of money on goods and services which are halal and permissible and in line with Sharia will be rewarded by Allah in the hereafter. Pi beli barang, guna barang untuk diri sendiri, untuk orang lain, untuk keluarga, juga dianggap sebagai ibadah yang akan diberi ganjaran oleh Allah di negeri akhirat. So, based on the role of an individual on this earth as the servant, abd, and vicegerent of Allah, so an individual is the abd or servant and Khalifa, vicegerent of Allah. The objective of a consumer is to maximize his or her falah or well-being in the consumption behavior. In order to achieve falah, the consumer must follow the guidance prescribed by Allah as stated in the Quran and Sunnah. Besides, besides the Quran, besides the Sunnah, individuals have to follow al-ijma'. Al-ijma' means the consensus of Islamic scholars, and also al-qiyas. So there are four sources in Islamic Sharia, which are the Quran, the Sunnah, the Ijma, and the Qiyas. Al-Quran, Al-Sunnah, Al-Ijma, Al-Qiyas. So those are the four main sources in Islamic fiqh. In short, the objective of an Islamic consumer is the maximization of falah or well-being by seeking the pleasure of Allah. Mardatillah, the pursuit of mardatillah, keredaan Allah, the pleasure of Allah. Means do what Allah says and do not do what Allah prohibits. So the objective of an Islamic consumer is the maximization of falah by seeking the pleasure of Allah. This is in contrast to conventional microeconomics, where in conventional microeconomics, there is no mention about the connection between consumer and the God. So in conventional microeconomics, consumers are assumed to maximize their utility in order to achieve the maximum level of economic satisfaction. Utility in conventional microeconomics represents pleasure, happiness, or satisfaction to a consumer. And this utility is obtained from the consumption of goods and services. So in So in conventional microeconomics, there is no halal, there is no haram. If a consumer likes to consume goods that are haram and maximize the utility by consuming haram goods and services, then the individual will consume that goods and services. It doesn't matter. They don't, in conventional microeconomics, consumers do not take into consideration about Sharia. They don't take into consideration about halal and haram. So that's the difference between consumption in Islam and consumption in conventional microeconomics. Principles of consumption in Islamic microeconomics. Principle number one is moderation. Islam encourages consumers to practice moderation, kesederhanaan, and avoid extravagance, dan mengelakkan berlebih-lebihan, and avoid miserliness, elakkan kedekut in consumption. So moderation is between the two extremes of extravagance and miserliness. Kesederhanaan itu terletak di antara dua ekstrem. Satu, berlebih-lebihan, dan kedua, bakhil. So, Islam tidak menggalakkan berlebih-lebihan dan Islam tidak menggalakkan bakhil. Islam menggalakkan kesederhanaan. Consumers should not spend more than they need. Consumers should not spend more than they need and should not be miserly by not spending enough to meet their needs. Jadi pengguna tidak perlu berlebih-lebihan, tak perlu membazir, tak perlu membeli lebih daripada keperluan. Dan pengguna juga tidak perlu kedekut. Consumers should spend moderately and maintain the balance. consumers should not spend more than what they can afford and should not be stingy, jangan kedekut, by not spending enough on themselves or others. Jangan kedekut sangat sampai tak mau belanja langsung untuk keperluan diri dan keperluan orang lain. Although the Quran and the Sunnah encourage moderation as the principle of an Islamic individual's consumption, no particular level of quantity of goods and services have been specifically mentioned. Moderation differs from one individual to another individual, depending on the norms and the socio-economic status of the individual. So, berapa banyak yang dikatakan sederhana? Tidak ada satu specific number. Semuanya bergantung. There is no particular level of quantity of goods and services have been mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah. Tidak ada. Moderation differs from one individual to another individual, depending on the norms and the socio-economic status of the individual. Principle number 2, prioritization in the utilization of wealth. Keutamaan dalam penggunaan harta. Prioritization in the utilization of wealth. Oneself and dependence. When we have the wealth, we should spend the wealth on who? The first one on ourselves and dependence, tanggungan. The wealth that is earned and bestowed upon an individual has to be utilized according to the will of Allah in order to achieve rewards from Allah and achieve falah. There are priorities for spending. Ada keutamaan bila kita membelanjakan harta. The first priority for a consumer is to spend for himself or herself and the dependents. Dan tanggungan. An individual should make effort to ensure that they take care of themselves and their dependents and to live a decent and comfortable life. Jadi, bila ada harta, pertamanya gunakan harta itu untuk diri sendiri dan tanggungan. And then, the next priority of spending should be on poor and needy relatives. Adik-beradik, kaum kerabat yang miskin dan memerlukan. Islam encourages individuals to give charity to relatives who are in need because it is considered as sadaqah. So if you have relatives who are poor and who are in need, then Islam encourages you to give sadaqah to your relatives who are poor. It is considered as sadaqah and will be rewarded in the hereafter. And by giving and helping relatives who are poor could strengthen family relationships. Next one, besides a relative, individuals should also give charity or sadaqah to others, such as orphans, neighbors, and the poor and needy. Savings is also recommended. Okay? Savings is also recommended, especially for those who have families and other responsibilities. If there is extra money, then it is recommended to put it in savings. Kena simpan. Savings will ensure that the individuals and their dependents are financially secure to meet their future needs. It should be mentioned that an individual Muslim who is eligible to pay zakat must pay zakat first before they can make savings. So before they make savings, they must make sure that they comply with the obligation to pay zakat. Okay? If you have, if an individual have an extra money, first he or she must calculate, and if he or she is eligible to pay zakat first. Then an individual is also encouraged to contribute to waqaf. Okay, there are many waqaf foundations, so Muslims is encouraged to contribute to waqaf to help the development of the Muslim community. All right. The next principle is permissible and prohibited items for consumption. Inshallah, we will continue with the third principle in Islamic consumption. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.